Okay, it's 11:50. It is the very, very last talking slot here, save for the closing keynotes at OSCON. And as such, I'm extremely grateful that you're all here, and I'm really happy with the turnout today, so thank you very, very much for coming. I'm going to leave this up for another about 30 to 60 seconds. For those of you who haven't snapped this QR code and haven't gone to the URL that it takes you to, you have the chance to do so right now. And if you don't have a phone or a tablet with you, then the URL is also spelled out at the top if you just want to open that on your laptop. Normally, I talk at OSCON and at various other conferences about the things that I do as part of my company practice, which is mostly related to open source, high availability, distributed storage, and OpenStack. And that's what I've been talking about at OSCON for the last 3 years and in various other conferences. And invariably, I've always had, after the talk, 1 or 2 or 3 people, or even during the talk, interrupt 1 or 2 or 3 people asking me about, well, what's this toolbox? What's the set of tools that you use to build your presentations? And so as a consequence, I basically decided for this year's OSCON, I'm going to share exactly that, because it's really not rocket science. Anyone can use it. You certainly can use it, and it might very possibly enhance your presentations a lot. A few words about myself. My name is Florian Haas. You can find my email at the bottom. I run a company called Hostexo. Hostexo is a professional services company that does specialize in consulting and training services for the aforementioned areas, namely open source, high availability, distributed storage, and open source cloud, where it's specifically OpenStack. So today I want to talk about my presentation toolbox, and I have not very humbly named the talk a presentation toolbox that just might blow your audience away. I want to say what this talk is about. This talk is really about presentation tools, just tools. It's not about delivery. It's not about the structure of your presentation. It's not about your personal presence as a presenter. And there's a very simple reason why it's not that. It's because there have been plenty of others before me, and there's going to be others after me who have covered this, namely structure and presence and things like that, way better than I can. And while I'm not going into all of this right now, there are at least 2 resources that I want to point you to if you're interested in this sort of topic and enhancing your presentation style and those sorts of things. One resource many of you will undoubtedly be familiar with is Presentation Zen by Gar Reynolds. Gar Reynolds is an ex-mid-level executive at Apple who has lived, I think, for 2 decades in Japan and has some very, very interesting insight from Japanese philosophy and things like that into his presentation style. And he keeps this blog called Presentation Zen. There's also a book by the same title. He has a very interesting Authors at Google talk that's a little dated by now. It's from 2008, so if you watch it, you'll see that some of the tools that he talks about are really kind of old. But a lot of the presentation and structure and delivery tips that he gives are exceedingly useful. And the second resource that I want to point you to is it's a talk that has been given at various conferences in various versions over the last 3 or 4 years. And I have always, at all the conferences that I've been at, I've always missed this talk. I've never had a chance to actually go see the talk until this Sunday, when I finally did have a chance to do that. So I can't really list it as an influence, but it is a wonderful summary of all the things that I also consider important and hold near and dear about presentation style, and that's Presentation Aikido by Damien Conway. I don't know if Damien's in the room right now. There's Damien, so Damien's awesome. Listen to this man. And you can find that there's various versions of this up on YouTube and so forth. So those 2 things I really, really highly recommend. Okay, so with having mentioned a few things that I think you should remember or look into when you're speaking, here's a few things which, in my humble opinion, you can safely forget about when you're delivering presentations. And those things that, in my humble opinion, you can safely forget about are things like PowerPoint, Keynote, LibreOffice or OpenOffice Impress, Google Slides. In other words, if you ask me, you can forget about any presentation tool that is essentially custom built for the purpose and is basically requires that very same presentation tool and only that very same presentation tool for both authoring and presenting. I think that's so 2013. We shouldn't be doing that anymore. I posit that there is a tool that every single one of us uses every day, in fact, multiple times every day, and we use it essentially regardless of the media that we're making use of. So we use this specific tool on our laptop or desktop, on our phone, on our tablet, everywhere. And that tool is your web browser. And when we think about that, a web browser is actually, it's a remarkable machine. It's like most operating system vendors will put tons of engineering effort on this. Web browsers are fast. They're standards compliant. There's lots and lots of development happening there to make them better and better and better. So why shouldn't we be using that for doing presentations? So I think what we want when we do presentations is we want our presentations to be in HTML, so they can be displayed in a browser, but we also want them to look good on any device, whether that's a phone, a tablet, a desktop, a gigantic screen that we're projecting onto, whether that's a 16:9, 5:4, 4:3 device, we shouldn't care. We should be able to write a single presentation that looks good on all of these devices, because I can tell you, just like it's nice to be able to do a presentation on a stage at a conference, it's just as nice and just as important to be able to do a quick pitch with some visuals on the tool that you have in your pocket, such as your phone, for example. But if you want to be able to do that, if you want to be able to write your presentations or provide your presentations in HTML so they run in a browser and look nice on any device, then that basically means you've got to be kind of like an HTML ninja or a CSS guru or at least a JavaScript expert, or ideally all three of those. But I'm none of those. I know just a little bit of HTML. I know barely any HTML5. I know just a little bit CSS. I know barely any CSS3. And my JavaScript skills are, well, I can cargo cult someone else's code and then perhaps change the names of a few variables. And that's essentially it. If I start to do more, I start breaking things. So I'm neither an HTML5 expert, nor a CSS expert, nor a JavaScript expert, because I don't have to be. Because there are others that have done that before me, and I can sort of stand on the shoulders of giants there. So the first tool that I want to introduce you to today is this thing called reveal.js. It's up on GitHub. You can find it there. It's not the only such tool that exists. There are several that allow you to write presentations in a decent language, and then they're translated into HTML and CSS and JavaScript. I've tried out a few of those. A few others that I've tried out are Impress.js or Slidey, and a few others. But as for reveal.js, when I started working with that, and I basically immediately fell in love with it. And this is where, for reasons of fairness, I basically have to subject you to this fanboy alert here. I am an absolute reveal.js fanboy by now, having used it for a year and a half, or about almost two. So anything that I say to be great about reveal.js, please take it with a little bit of a grain of salt, because I'm literally blind to like what's not so cool about it. So what is Reveal? Reveal is a full-blown presentation framework that uses nothing but HTML5, CSS, and JavaScript. And I love that. But there is this wonderful feature in reveal.js which makes it even greater for me, which is that it lets me write all of my presentations, including this one, of course, in Markdown. So I can use like a really, really simple text-based language that is, just complex enough that my little monkey brain can actually parse and use it, and write presentations that actually look kind of nice, and that sort of thing just completely makes me squeal. So let's take a look at how this works. So this basically enables me to write a presentation that's a simple HTML. Don't be turn off by this here. Everything that you see between the two head tags here is complete boilerplate. It's exactly the same in every one of my Reveal presentations, including this one. The only thing that ever changes is the title. That's all. So everything else is like complete boilerplate. I copy and paste it with every presentation that I write. And then I have these individual sections here, which I could toss in a single markdown file, or I could have markdown files by sections, which is what I tend to prefer. And when I want to look at this markdown, for example, we can certainly do that. So, for example, this is the hang on one sec, markdown. So this is the intro that you just saw. You know, it has my little portrait up there and my name and blah, blah, and it's like super, super simple because the only things that I really use are like level 1, 2, and 3 headings. So if you're familiar with Markdown, you're easily going to see that that's a level 1 heading here. That's just the 1 hash. If I want to use a heading level 2, that's the 2 hashes. It's a heading level 3, that's 3 hashes. If I want to inject links in there, I just write a URL and it automatically turns into a link. If I want emphasis or strong emphasis, then I just wrap in single asterisks or double asterisks. I can inject images. This is something that you saw here at the very top. So I can inject an image with an alt text, and that's it. And this enables me to be extremely productive in writing my slides and then editing and changing them as I wish. And of course, I keep all of this stuff in a Git repo so I can track my changes. This is also wonderful for collaborating. If you're working with someone else on your presentation, you just have a shared Git repo or a fork, and you work that way. And that's just exceedingly nice. So for example, what I want to do is here, just for a little bit of eye candy, I want to make a tiny little change here, which is, I don't really like to have logos on my individual slides because I think they tend to take some attention away from the material. But what sometimes I actually like is to have a little bit of a background image, so people who subsequently download these slides or look at these slides or watch the video or things like that know what conference this was presented at. So let's quickly reload this here. And now we get this nice little, one sec. Now we have this little OSCON logo that forms this little parallax background behind the entire presentation. And another nice little feature that you can see here from Reveal is this little overview mode. So if I'm presenting on my laptop, I hit escape, I get this little overview mode, so I can easily switch between individual slides and between the individual sections that I want to present. If you're looking at the presentation on your mobile device right now, like an iPhone or an Android phone or a tablet, you can get the same effect with a pinch zoom. So you just do a pinch zoom out on your mobile device and you get this overview mode, and then you can simply tap on that thing. So this is one of the things that are particularly nice about Reveal is that the presentation automatically comes with a mobile experience built in because you can just swipe throughout your presentation and do things like that as you normally would on a mobile device. Another nice little feature for Reveal is we actually get a speaker console. Let me show you that here. So that's you hit lowercase s and you get this nice little useful. Let me put this on full screen here for you. You get this nice little speaker console here, which has your current slide, your next slide. This basically acts like a confidence monitor. You have the time elapsed that you've been spending talking and the current wall clock time. And if I had been using speaker notes, which we can, then those would show up here over in this space where the mouse pointer is, or if it's a wider monitor, then this would show up underneath in the lower left quadrant there. So that's another nice little handy feature. And of course, if you're presenting on 2 monitors, then you can put this one browser window on one monitor and your actual main display on your main screen. And then of course I can move forward here to my next slide, and if I now close this window here, then we are nicely synchronized again with the main window there. Those are just a few of the features in Reveal. There's other stuff that's exceedingly cool for things like presentations that you deliver over the web. So, for example, you can point your visitors to a magic URL where the slides will advance in sync with a master server that you are controlling. So you can actually give them basically the screen full that you want them to see, and a handful of other features. For those of you who like VI, you actually get VI keyboard shortcuts here as well, which I thought was a nice little touch. So the second tool that I frequently use when I do demos and presentations is this wonderful little thing called Shell in a Box. So Shell in a Box is a terminal emulator that uses nothing, again, but HTML5 and JavaScript and Ajax. And I think that's really, really slick. So what you can do is you have this little thing that you fire up, a Shell in a Box daemon, and that exposes a tiny little web server on your machine. And you can then point that to anything that basically spits out a terminal. Such as a login session, or you can directly fire up a VI session, or whatever you would like to do. So what I do here, and this is, of course, Shell in a Box, what I do here is I have Shell in a Box running, and I start it from this little script here. Oops. There it is. So what that does is it starts Shell in a Box. It lets it listen only on the localhost IP address. It uses a custom port, and what I do is I let it fire off screen. And screen is this little utility that provides you with a virtual terminal that you can then attach and reattach and detach. And what I do here is I just fire that up with screen dash lowercase x capital RR, which means that just reattach to the screen terminal that you previously used. And if there's none running right now, then fire one up. And so that means I can have this Shell in a Box instance at multiple times in my presentation, and I can always show the same terminal, which is really nice and helpful. And like I said, Shell in a Box lives on Google Code, not on GitHub. But if, for example, you're on Ubuntu, using Shell in a Box is really, really easy, because that's an apt-get install Shell in a Box. It's a readily available package there for you. So with Shell in a Box and Reveal, you can do basically really, really nice presentations that involve demos of terminals. So what I do is and I can show you this here, and I can, of course, include that in my Markdown. So where's my Markdown for the Shell in a Box section? That's that one. And as you're probably very well aware, in Markdown you can do inline HTML. And so in this case, I just use an inline iframe that points to the little server, the little web server that Shell in a Box exposes, and boom, I have my terminal in an Ajax JavaScript HTML window that I can freely position on my presentation canvas, which is really helpful. By the way, if you're interested, I don't have a demo for this, but if you're interested in not exposing a terminal window, but anything that lives in an X terminal, then you can use something similar, which is called NoVNC. It's basically a little Ajax HTML5 canvas that gives you a VNC client. And then you can do that. And if you want to show anything with that uses X, there's actually an X application, then you can do that from within your browser as well, which is kind of slick. Okay, then there's QRcode.js. Now, I use QRcode.js because I've found out that there is a really, really simple way and an extremely handy way to engage your audience when you're presenting, such that you want to point them to specific resources or things like that. And the idea is really, really simple. The idea is that you take a QR code and you just put them on a full screen without comment. And people will open that QR code on their phone and or tablet. And I think about 80% of you did exactly that when you walked in. So this just works. And what I did for you is I gave you a link to these very slides so you could follow along, which is something that is helpful specifically for people who are visually impaired, people who don't speak the same language as the presenter, and those sorts of things, where you simply want to be able to share your slides with them. And of course, it also gives them the ability to skip back and forth if they wish. So for example, if they have dozed off for a little bit or not paid attention for some time because they got distracted, then they can easily catch up with you, and they won't completely tune out. But you can also do other things. Things that I've used and which have worked out really well is you can essentially pre-process tweets for people. Twitter has this magic URL that goes twitter.com/tweet $text equals. And if someone opens that either on their Twitter app, on their phone or tablet or whatever, or just clicks on it, then they get a little thing that basically pops up and says, do you want to tweet this? With your own Twitter account. And I've used that for having people check into my talk. Basically, prepare a statement that says, I'm in talk so-and-so in room so-and-so. Or you could, for example, use something like, I'm in Joe's talk about XYZ, and I think it's : and then have people just enter one word, and then hit tweet. And you get immediate feedback from your audience, like right after the talk. You can sit down, how was my feedback that I got from my audience. So I find these QR codes really, really useful and a simple and easy way to engage the audience. And doing that is also really simple using a little JavaScript library called qrcode.js. So hang on one sec. What is this guy doing here? This is not liking me here. There we go. Oh, come on. Well, let's just go back to a different shell in a box, which we already knew worked. There we go. Much better. So how do I do this qrcode.js thing? Let's take a look at our index.html again. Oops, wrong directory. So that's this section right here. And the nice thing about qrcode.js, which is a little JavaScript library that generates QR codes on the fly, is that it generates QR codes on the fly. So what you could also do, of course, is you could generate these QR codes offline, and then inject them as images into your talk. But if you do it this way, then that enables you to basically make last-minute changes if you want to, and you don't need to worry about updating those images. So what this does, there's a little piece of JavaScript near the end, which is also boilerplate, which you can basically copy and paste. But as this presentation is being loaded, it basically takes the href of that link, parses it, and then the div is being overwritten with a canvas with a full screen QR code. If you want to do this, just a quick suggestion, it usually helps to, specifically if you have long and complicated URLs, to put them through a URL shortener like goo.gl, simply because that will make your QR code simpler and that will make it register better for a person that stands at the back of the room trying to snap a picture like that. So this is why this goes through goo.gl, is just to make a bit of a less convoluted QR code there. And you can, this is something that you shouldn't be overusing. It doesn't really help very well if you've got a million QR codes in your presentations, unless you want to do some sort of treasure hunt or whatever. But one or two of these can be really, really effective, such as to get people follow you on Twitter or to point them to a URL that you really care about or anything of that nature. So qrcode.js. And then there's GitHub. I found GitHub to be a really, really useful tool and a wonderful hosting platform for hosting my presentations. And that's, in fact, exactly what you're using right now if you're following this along on a on a mobile device. So GitHub Pages, for those of you who are not familiar, is a way to essentially host a project website from any GitHub repo. And the way this works is you have to create a branch in your repo named GH Pages. And once you push to that branch in your repo, then anything that is in that branch will be rendered at a URL that is constructed with HTTP your username .github.io / the name of your repo. And this applies to both individual user repos and repos owned by organizations, in the latter case, it's the org name rather than the username that precedes the github.io. Normally, and this is what's documented in the GitHub documentation, GH Pages is an orphan branch. I mean, GitHub is basically meant to host code repositories, and you typically don't want your code, your makefile.am or something on your website. So what you normally do is you create an orphan branch, which is a branch that starts from 0, and then within that branch you inject your index.html and whatever you'd like to do, or whatever you'd like to include in the description of your project. But, of course, it doesn't have to be an orphan branch. And if what you're maintaining in that repo is already HTML, then, of course, it doesn't need to be an orphan branch. It could, in fact, just be a copy of your master branch. And I like to combine that with Git submodules, which a lot of people hate on. And yes, there are some things that are really, really poor about them. But in my case, my presentations tend to rely on two other repositories that are also hosted on GitHub, namely reveal.js and qrcode.js. And what Git submodules allow me to do is cross-reference a different Git repo from my Git repo. And there it just looks like a subdirectory, and I can effectively not only point it at a specific remote repo, but actually a specific revision in that repo. And so what I do is, let's see if this works better here. This is much nicer. And so what I do is I have a couple of submodules here. So that's reveal.js and qrcode.js. So that means if you're cloning my repo, you automatically get everything that's essentially required to run the rest of the presentation, which is nice. And this stuff actually gets pulled in a GitHub page as well. So what I have here, let's do this. I have two branches, the master branch that I'm just presenting from right now, and the GH Pages branch that I push to that you just opened. And there's just very, very little difference between the two. So I'm on my master branch, so let's see how the GH Pages branch is different. I decided that having the QR code on top of the hosted stuff doesn't really make a lot of sense, so I just yanked that out. I added a few things for you on your mobile device, namely that you get a progress bar and you get controls to control the presentation, which are nothing but distracting when I'm presenting here. Other than that, I added a Google Analytics cookie, and for the iframes where I was doing the shell-in-a-box demonstrations, I simply added a placeholder saying this presentation includes a live demonstration at this point. And that's it. That's essentially the entire change. So what I want to do now, for example, is I'm still on my master branch, so I want to do a commit am enable background image. There we go, and now we go to GH Pages, git merge master. Okay, that's an easy merge, and now I do a git push. And now you can refresh that presentation on all of your devices, and lo and behold, you'd see this nice little OSCON logo in the background. Simple as that. So that's all that you need to do, and this is a wonderful way of hosting your presentations on a platform that is readily accessible for anyone. And of course, then you can do what I just did, namely give out exactly that link to everyone attending your presentation. You can give it to the conference organizers because they're going to ask for the slides, etc. And that just makes it really, really easy to make your presentations accessible. And by the simple little trick of injecting a Google Analytics cookie, you also get much better feedback on how popular your presentation is versus just uploading a PDF to a conference website. Because you never really know whether or not your presentation has actually engaged people or whether they can use it. Whereas if you're all of a sudden generating tons of traffic that you can get out of your GA, then that's good feedback. So those are really the main things that I find really, really useful when I'm doing presentations: reveal.js, shell in a box, qrcode.js, and GitHub Pages and Git submodules. But there's also a few other nifty little helpers that I occasionally use, and I want to share those as well. One thing that you may or may not have noticed, I am a bit of a font geek, and I absolutely love Google Fonts, formerly called Google Web Fonts. It is a collection of over 500 and something freely licensed fonts. So they're either under an open font license or the SIL license that you can just use. The instructions there are completely foolproof. It's super easy to include that in your HTML or CSS, or for that matter, download them to your laptop and use them that way. So that's incredible, and I absolutely love it. And if you're in any way even an 80% font geek, you're going to love this too. Another resource that I find very, very useful for my visuals, I mean, this presentation here was mostly textual. My Ignite talk on Sunday used visuals with almost no text. I found all of those visuals on Flickr. For me, Flickr is a wonderful resource to find presentation visuals. What's really nice is the Flickr user community tends to be composed of absolutely obsessed taggers. So it's wonderful how much really, really nice visuals that you can find on Flickr based on the metadata that people have put in there. Tags, just free text, locations, things like that. So next time around, you need a wonderful, beautiful visual of a water drop or a musical instrument or some beautiful location, say, whatever, Table Mount, Cape Town, South Africa. You're going to find it there. And what's also really, really nice is that many, many, many Flickr users make their content available under a Creative Commons license. A nifty little trick that I learned from Baron Schwartz, who gets all the credit for this one, is you can easily combine that with a feature in Google Chrome. Google Chrome has these things called the custom search engines. And if you use this magic string here, what this will do is it will create a custom search engine for you, and I map that to just the keyboard shortcut F on my Chrome. It will search Flickr for anything that matches the text that you input using any Creative Commons license that allows me to actually reuse and modify the content, and then spits that out sorted by relevance. It is amazing how many beautiful, wonderful visuals that you can find that you can absolutely legally and wonderfully use for your presentations, provided, of course, that you follow the rules of Creative Commons in terms of attribution and share alike and so forth. The same thing you can also get out of Google Image Search. I've also thrown the magic string up for you here, and of course you'll also find that in your in the presentation that you have access to. This basically says query for whatever string that you define, make an image search, and restrict or filter the results by Creative Commons share alike. That, of course, basically shows you all of the matching content from the entire web, which means that you have to do a little bit more searching, which means, given the fact that the quality of pictures on Flickr is often so outstanding, I only resort to this when I actually can't find a visual for something on Flickr, which is rare. It would be something, I don't know, searching for cheese from unpasteurized milk. Maybe there's actually no Flickr visuals for that one. So those are my nifty little helpers that I use very, very frequently. Certainly not for all of my presentations, but for a number. If you're intrigued and you also want to try this out and ditch Impress and PowerPoint and Keynote and whatnot and just build presentations that look nice in your browser and that you can essentially display anywhere and take with you on your phone and so forth, then by all means, please consider yourself invited to start here with this very presentation that I gave you right now. It is obviously on GitHub. My GitHub username is fghaas, and the repo is OSCON 2014 Presentation Toolbox. Feel free to fork that and start working on that and use that as a starting point for your own explorations. Share your content, copy my content, adapt it, remix. All of these slides are under the Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike license. So if you build your presentation based on this, you'd make me a very, very happy person. Let me know, and I would love to take a look and see where this takes you. The easiest way of connecting with me is on Google+. I kind of tend to like Google+, and I will be very, very happy to exchange ideas and hear your thoughts about this and about where this takes you. My Google+ username is Florian Haas. And with that, I thank you very much for your attention. I thank you very much for coming. I hope you have a great closure of the conference. And I'll be happy to take your questions. Yes? Say again, please. Does Reveal have a feature to make hard copies? Yes, it does. This is documented on the Reveal GitHub page. There's a magic URL that you can, or a magic string that you append to the URL of your browser. It's basically !print-pdf, and then it will create pretty reasonable PDF output for you if a conference organizer actually does insist on a PDF. Which they shouldn't, because, like I said, that would be so 2013. OK, so with that, I thank you very, very much. And if anyone has any more questions, I'll be happy to hang around here and take them here. Thank you for coming.